Hello, I'm Bruce Walker, and I'm right here from Madison County, Alabama. What I enjoy more than anything else is sharing family stories, because the glue, the cultural glue that holds us all together is our shared common stories. If you look at the United States of America and all the stories about George Washington, about Thomas Jefferson, about George Washington Carver, Martin Luther King. Look at all of those stories, and the stories around these men is what gives us commonality. So I bring it down to a real personal level, and I love telling family stories that you can relate to, and you think about some of your own family stories. And the thing that brings me the most pleasure is when people are walking out of the audience into the lobby and I hear them say, well, you know, I remember the time so-and-so, or I remember this. I just smile, because that's the power of storytelling. My Uncle Charlie was a farmer that had an old pond down in his back pasture. One year he decided he's going to make a park out of it. So he cut the grass real close, planted some fruit trees. For a number of years, every evening during fruiting season, he'd go down there with a bucket and pick up the fruit. One evening as he was going down toward the pond, he heard some giggling. He got a little bit closer, and there was some naked women swimming in his pond. As he got down there near it, one of them looked up and saw him and said, now, if you think that we're going to get out of this pond, old man, you got another thing coming, you pervert. You get back up away from here. My Uncle Charlie, without missing a beat, held up his bucket and said, oh, no, ma'am, I didn't come down here to spy on you ladies. I came down here to feed the alligator. My grandmother was a great woman of faith. Well, she had to be. She raised 13 children during the Great Depression with my granddaddy. Now, their lives evolved around the little church just down the gravel road from them. Sunday mornings, Sunday nights, Wednesday nights, that's what their life consisted of, being there at the church. One summer, they had a visiting professor come from Birmingham, and his topic was enlightening them on the miracles of the Old Testament. He stood in the pulpit and bluntly told them, said, none of those miracles actually happened. He said, take, for example, about the Moses and the children of Israel drowning in the Red Sea. It did not happen. Through a mistranslation, instead of the Red Sea, it was the Reed Sea, and it's only about 3 inches deep. So therefore, there was no drowning of any Egyptians. Well, after he had finished his talk, most people made exits to the left and the right, and nobody wanted to shake his hand. My grandmother made a beeline right to him, grabbed his hand, shook it vigorously, and said, I just want to thank you, sir, for clearing up something for me. Said, you know, when you explained about the miracle of the Moses and the children of Israel and the Red Sea, said, that's a bigger miracle than I thought. So just to think that my God could have drowned all those Egyptians in just 3 inches of water. Where I grew up down in St. Clair County, we didn't have a proper funeral home. Who we had was Brother Randy. Now, Brother Randy was a part-time taxidermist and full-time mortician. Now, don't laugh, because it was kind of known, though we didn't advertise it, that if you used him for your funeralizing needs, your next deer head was mounted free. Now, when Brother Randy got the call, he'd go down to the Piggly Wiggly in town, and he'd go into the meat locker and pull out a 3-inch slab of Talladega marble. He called it a cooling board, and that's what he'd lay your loved one out on to keep them fresh. Well, when he got the call down to Grandma and Grandpa's house, because Grandma and Grandpa were serious about sitting up with the dead. There wasn't any of this 30-minute go by and visit for a second and leave. No, sir. When a loved one passed away down at our home place, everybody came. The way you could tell a funeral was going on down in the country was that you'd see cars lined up and down both sides of the road with every state you could think of represented as loved ones came home to pay their respect. Now, when Grandma redid her living room, she redesigned it so that right over by the fireplace there was an alcove where a coffin would fit in just right. And then when we weren't having funerals, of course, she had a couch there, and I never felt comfortable sitting on that couch. Now, when we got the word that Uncle Lester had passed away. Of course, we all came in home, and you begin to hear the phrases that are normally said at funerals, you know, like, I'm sorry for your loss. And the one that was just doubly wrong about Uncle Lester was that somebody said, oh, God must have needed another angel in his choir. Well, if you knew Uncle Lester, you knew that wasn't true. He couldn't sing a lick, and if that was a criteria for dying, he'd live forever. Now, when we got down to the house, my job was fly swatter boy. Now, that's what my position was, and what a fly swatter boy is real simple. In the South, in the summer, with the windows raised and no air conditioning, you're going to get some green visitors. And sure enough, my job standing there with the cheesecloth pulled up over the coffin is to make sure that it stays free of those visitors. Well, I took the fly swatter standing there. Now, there's an art to it. You got to understand the art. First of all, you can't hit it straight down because it'll make a green, greasy blob, and that don't look good next to your loved one's face. And then if you hit it too hard sideways, bug parts splatter everywhere, and that's not good either. So I was standing there doing my job with my cousin Kenny in there, and I don't know what got into him. My cousin Kenny went right over to the coffin, pulled the cheesecloth back from over Uncle Lester's face, and put his finger right on his cheek. It sucked it right in. We were horrified. What are we going to do? Well, I walked over there and tried to fix it, and the more I worked with it, the worse it looked. Well, about that time we heard his widow, Aunt Leoma, come walking in the door. And when Aunt Leoma came in, we were ready for the explosion. Oh, we knew we were done for. Well, she walked up, looked down at her dearly beloved, and then instead of anger, there was a big smile come over her face. She looked at us and looked back down at him, and she says, well, don't your Uncle Lester look so natural? It looks just like he's got a big wad of chewing tobacco in his mouth. You know, Red Hound was his favorite brand. Kenny and I looked at each other, and then I bowed my head, and I said a little prayer. Now I said, ain't God good? Now, my Uncle Lester, when Aunt Leoma died the first time, he called the funeral home, and they came out and, of course, loaded her up and gently, solemnly led her down the steps out the front door. And as they went down to the bottom step and got ready to put her over in the hearse, they bumped into the big old chinaberry tree right over there beside it. Well, when they did, it jostled her, and she roused up, and she lived 10 more years. Now, the second time and the last time that Aunt Leoma died, Uncle Lester called the funeral home. They came out, and the same men came in and gently carried her down the steps. And as they got down toward the bottom of it, my Uncle Lester cleared his throat and said, watch out for that tree. Uncle Charlie and Aunt Versie were married for over 65 years. They were what we called a matched pair. Now, what we remembered most about Uncle Charlie and Aunt Versie is that Uncle Charlie dearly delighted in aggravating Aunt Versie. In fact, he'd get behind the door, and when she'd come walking through, he'd jump out and holler, boo! And she'd fall back, and her rejoinder was always affectionately said, you old fool! And we'd all laugh. Well, Aunt Versie could be clocked by her schedule every day. Same thing happened. In the morning, she'd get up and make big old cat head biscuits. Along about noontime, she'd put dinner on the table. And then in the late afternoon, she'd get the milk bucket up and she'd go down to the barn to milk the cow. That was her day, every day the same. Well, one evening, as she got up to go down to the barn, Uncle Charlie had beat her down there. And he climbed up in the corn crib, shut the door, and stood there and waited. As she came into the breezeway, ready to milk the cow, he threw that door open and jumped out and hollered, boo! Woo! Aunt Versie fell back, and she nearly fell, and you could tell she was really startled. She'd like to drop the bucket, and she looked up at Uncle Charlie, and she said, you old fool, you like to scare the pants off of me. Well, Uncle Charlie didn't miss a lick. He got up, climbed back in the corn crib, shut the door, and then he threw it back open and jumped out and hollered, "Boo! Boo! Boo!" Let me tell you something. They may have been old, but their romantic fire had not gone out. A couple of farms over from ours lived Deford and Eason and their widowed mama. Now, Deford and Eason would work out in the field in these hot summer days, and one summer, Eason, the summer just got the best of him. He said, "I'm going off to college and I'm going to quit work." So he went off down to Auburn and he got himself a BS degree. And when he came back home, sure enough, he said, "I'm not working on the farm anymore," and he went to work selling agricultural supplies. And so he would be gone every week from town to town, but he'd always call in and check on him. He'd call his brother Deford up and say, "Deford, how you doing?" And he'd say, "How's Mama doing?" And he had a beloved cat named Boy. But now, as the cat got bigger, he called it Big Boy. And he'd always want to know, "How's Big Boy doing?" So one week he called in and he asked, "How's the farm? How's the crops? How's Mama doing?" And then he asked, "How's Big Boy doing?" Well, Eason didn't even miss a lick as he heard Deford explain to him. Big Boy got ran over by a car and squished flat as a flitter. We don't know who hit him, didn't get the tag number, but all I can tell you is Big Boy's dead. Oh, Eason cried and sniffled through the phone, and he said, "Deford, you didn't have to break it to me so bluntly. You know, if you'd have told me kind of like this, you could have said, 'Well, Big Boy is up on the roof and we can't get him down.' And then in the next phone call, you could have told me, 'Well, we got Big Boy down, but a rain came and he's got pneumonia.' And then in the third phone call, you could have finally told me, 'Well, Big Boy didn't make it. He went on to be with the Lord.'" And Deford took note of that and said, well, "I'm sorry, brother. I realize I shouldn't have done it that way. I should have been more gentle telling you about Big Boy's demise." And Eason said, "Well, that's okay. I understand you didn't like the cat much anyway." And then he went into asking his normal questions. He said, how's everything on the farm?" "Fine." He said, "Well, how's Mama doing?" And Eason asked about his mama, and then Deford said, "Well, she's up on the roof and we can't get her down." If you'd like to get a hold of me, and I love to run my mouth, you can reach me either brucestoryteller.com, that's on the World Wide Web, or you can call me at 256-658-1735. I recently got rid of the party line, so you shouldn't have any trouble getting through to me.